All right, we're going to go ahead and get rolling. Welcome everyone to tonight's presentation. As always, it's a pleasure. If you do have any issues hearing the presentation, sometimes we have those audio issues. Please, uh, and then also throughout the presentation tonight, uh, uh, you'll see a QR code. You can scan that at any time, create an account on our platform, and go through a lot of the planning that we're talking about tonight for your individual situation. So I'm also going to launch the poll for tonight's presentation. You can pull that up at any time, just because we always like to how people have heard about us. Uh, some questions are like who's participating in different TSPs, given the topic we're covering tonight. So I see a lot of new faces on webinar tonight. So for those of you who are new, welcome. And for those who've been on our presentations before, welcome back. My name is John Mantilla. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at Parco. And at Parco, we work with federal employees across the country and around the world, helping them plan their retirements no matter what stage of their career that they're in. We work with a lot of folks who are just starting out, who want to make sure they're taking full advantage of the benefits offered as being a federal employee. We work with folks mid-career who want to make sure, hey, look, have I put myself in the right position for the future? And then obviously we work with a lot of folks nearing the end of their careers who want to make sure that they're making the right steps to take advantage of those golden years. And we've presented to folks at all kinds of different places. We've gotten to travel and meet a lot of really cool people and been featured in a lot of really cool publications. And so tonight we're going to be talking about Roth conversions. It's a topic that and Roth accounts. It's a topic we've been getting a lot more and more, especially as the tax code has been changing and different administrations have come in and have left. And so we'll start by talking about what retirement accounts are. Then we'll talk about how to think about the different growth and contributions. We'll talk about RMDs, which is one of the reasons why this conversation is so important. We'll go through some of the mechanics of Roth conversion. We'll walk through a practical example and show you how within our platform you can do some Roth converting planning and how that looks. And then we'll talk about how to get started and some next steps. Sound good to everybody? One ground rule I'll also mention too. I do know we have a really large audience tonight. If you do have questions, ask them within that chat window in there, and either during the presentation, one of our teammates will answer it, or I'll answer it post presentation. So let's start by talking about what are retirement accounts. Like, what the heck are these things? Why are they different? So retirement accounts are accounts, special savings accounts, essentially created by Congress to give Americans tax advantage ways to save for retirement. And so generally, there can be a few different types of retirement accounts, but they tend to fall into one of two tax qualifications. They can either be traditional or they can be Roth. And it's important to talk about how they're different because then we can talk about how to plan for them. So when it comes to a traditional accounts are funded with money from your paycheck or from working that has not been taxed. So you put money from that account into a traditional retirement planning account. That money has not been taxed. Then, whenever you take money out of that account, usually in retirement, you pay taxes on that money as if it were income. So it's a way to defer taxes from your working years to the future, usually in retirement. A Roth works sort of the opposite. You fund it with dollars that have already been taxed, but then all of the growth, gains, and interest that happen inside of that Roth account are tax-free forever. So it's really just about when do you pay the taxes. On a traditional account, the taxes are deferred. You pay the taxes whenever you withdraw money from the account in the future. With a Roth, the taxes you pay up front, but then you never pay taxes on that money again. And so when you think about how that kind of looks like graphically, you know, step one for a traditional account, it's funded with pre-tax contributions. Your account grows tax deferred. Then when you take withdrawals from that account, those withdrawals are taxable to have a net balance. Whereas with a Roth, it works a little bit differently. You're paying taxes on money as it goes in, and then the growth, gains, and interest are all tax-free forever. Now, when it comes to different types of retirement accounts that could be traditional or could be Roth, um, this could be a 401k or something that's employer sponsored, like your TSP, a 403b, or there's things that are individual accounts like an IRA or a Roth IRA. There are contribution limits. This is how much you can put into each of these accounts every every year. If you're under age 50, you can put up to $24,500 into your TSP. If you're under age 50, you can also contribute up to $7,500 to your traditional IRA. We're going to talk about some situations where that's not exactly an option. If you're over age 50, and this should actually say over 50, uh, you can contribute more. You can contribute $32,500 into your TSP and up to $8,600 into an IRA. And if you're between ages 60 and 63, this is a new rule that came about a year and a half ago. You can actually contribute even more, 35,750 into your employer sponsored account, your 401k, your TSP. Now, when it comes to these accounts, there can be earnings limits. So this is really important because some of you might be making some good money now. And so if you've heard on the radio or something like that where it says, hey, look, if you make too much, you can't contribute to a retirement account. That's true for IRAs, individual retirement accounts that you might open with Schwab or Altruist or Fidelity. And those are the folks we work with here on Parco Wealth Management. But employer sponsored accounts like your 401k and your TSP, those are not subject to any earnings limits. So you could be a doctor at the VA and make, what doctors make at the VA, and there's no earnings limit. You're not restricted from participating in a 401k or in your TSP. However, those folks can't contribute into an IRA. When it comes to the IRA earnings limits, if you're single, you can make up to $150,000 with no restriction. If you make more than that, they start to reduce the amount that you can make to be able to contribute. And if you make more than $165,000, you can't contribute to an IRA. If you're married, those limits are higher for married folks. Everybody tracking so far? Great. So if we're kind of summarizing the differences between these types of accounts, there's non-qualified accounts. People ask us this all the time. If you have money in like a savings account, a brokerage account, something like that, that's money you put in there that's after tax. You pay taxes on things like dividends, interest, capital gains. You can hold those anywhere, right? You could have that at E-Trade, you could have that at Morgan Stanley, you could have it at Schwab, Chase, whoever. That's a non-qualified account, whatever your bank account is. But there's no RMDs, required minimum distributions, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit. If you have a traditional account, it's funded with dollars that have not been taxed. If you take money out of that account, it's taxed. Withdrawals are taxed as income. They can be held at your 401k, your employer, or an IRA and a custodian. And they do have RMDs. And then Roth accounts are funded with money that has already been taxed. There's no taxes due, though, in the future. Again, you can hold those almost anywhere. And there's no RMDs. Really important. So I think part of the reason why a lot of you signed on tonight is that, people are always worried about what mistakes are people making when it comes to putting money into a Roth or putting money in traditional? Which one's best? Which one makes the most sense? Well, we always like to start when it comes to conversations like this first is that if taxes were flat, meaning let's say that the United States had a flat tax rate of 20%, then whether you put your money into a Roth account or a traditional account actually really wouldn't matter. And let's walk through an example. Let's say that the United States had a flat 20% tax rate. You contributed $5,000 per year. You invested that money, $5,000 per year, every year over the course of 20 years. And let's say the account didn't grow at all, right? Let's strip away any of the complexity. Under a traditional account, you're putting in $5,000 per year, whereas under a Roth, you're putting in $5,000 per year, but only $4,000 of that's net going into the account. So in traditional, $5,000 per year, no taxes are withheld. You've got $100,000 in that account at the end of the 20-year period. In the Roth, because of the tax withholding, there's only $80K in that account. However, flat 20% tax rate, the ending balance for each of them is exactly the same. Okay. So this is a really important framework to understand is that if taxes were the same, there would not be any difference between choosing to put money into a traditional account or into a Roth. So the whole strategy comes around thinking about what are the tax like what's the what taxes do you think you're going to have to pay now, and how does that compare to the taxes you think you'll have to pay in retirement? That's where the whole arbitrage happens. Because sometimes we have folks that mention to us, hey, look, I'm going to put more money into my traditional account because there's more money that's going to be able to grow. And we say, well, look, yeah, there could be more money available to grow, but if taxes were flat, it nets out to be the same value. So when we think about what's better, it really depends on what your tax bracket is and where you think those are going to be, much more so than than anything else. And actually, what matters more is how much you save versus where you save. That's super super important. So when we think about the traditional account, we'll start with that because that's the oldest one. People all the time will come to us and say, "Hey, I've got all this money saved in my traditional account." Well, it's important to keep in mind. Let's say that you have a traditional TSP balance of $400,000 saved. That's a great amount of money to have saved. But keep in mind, some portion of that balance is not yours, right? Embedded within that traditional TSP balance is a tax liability, and you will have to pay it at some. And a big part of our job at Parco and your job as a retirement person who's planning for retirement is you're trying to minimize the amount of taxes that you have to pay on that balance, right? That's the whole question that we're thinking about today. So when you look at your TSP balance, you say, hey, look, here's how much I've saved. Keep in mind that the net amount that's actually yours is actually much smaller. I think part of the reason why people like putting money into Roth is, yeah, you do pay taxes as the money goes in, but whatever money you have in your Roth, is your money. There's no future tax question. If there's an administration change and they jack tax rates up a lot, your Roth account is totally insulated from that because that's the whole point of that account. And so when people ask us, hey, they get into, I won't say arguments, but they have spirited opinions about Roth versus traditional. Maybe somebody at work who's like that. We always come back to level set to say what actually matters the most is how much and for how long you contribute. It matters actually way more than where you contribute. So the person that's putting in 1% of their salary is doing way better than the person who's putting in zero. But the person who's putting in 2% of their salary is doing way better than the guy that's putting in 1% of their salary. So what we've done here is we've just shown if you contributed different amounts of your salary, assuming you made $80,000 a year, assuming 5% growth, how much would that account grow to over a 5, 10, 20-year period? And that's really where you're going to get the big leverage. Invariably, and this is really important for everybody on the call tonight, we've worked with thousands of federal employees over the course of having Parco. And the folks that we work with who are always in the best shape for retirement, invariably, are the ones for whom their contribution percentage toward their TSP, toward their 401k, toward their retirement savings is the most. That is the single biggest predictor for retirement success because it helps make everything easier. So if you take nothing else away from tonight's presentation, I know you all came here to learn about Roth and traditional, but the most important thing that we can always say to folks is save as much as you can. I wouldn't be doing my job as a fiduciary if I didn't say that. So the reason why traditional and Roth and all this stuff matters and why we have to think about it is because of this thing called required minimum distributions. Why does Roth conversion so much? Why is it so important to plan? Because of these RMDs that every American, whether you work for the federal government or not, faces if they have retirement accounts. So RMDs are monies that you must withdraw from your retirement accounts when you hit specific ages. And people ask us all the time, why do RMDs exist? Why does the government make me take this money out? Well, they exist to ensure that the government eventually collects money from money that's held in tax advantage accounts like traditional TSPs, traditional IRAs, traditional 401ks. The government wants their cut. And so when do RMDs start? Depends on when you're born. So if you were born in 1949 or before, you're already well into your RMD age. Same for those who were born in 1950. For those who were born between 1951 and 1959, your RMD age is 73. And for those who were born in 1960 or later, it's 75. Now, I'll say the government has been raising RMD ages quite a bit over the past 5 years. It used to be 70 and a half. Then during the pandemic, it was raised to 72. They've been raising it more and more and more. I would not be surprised if this age continues to get raised. However, right now, that's the current age. These are the current ages. Your RMDs are dependent on your age and how much is in your account, how much your balance is. Now, what's kind of crazy, and I'm sure some of you have felt confused by this, if you go on the IRS's website, or sometimes even if you go on some other companies' websites, and you look for the uniform RMD, required minimum distribution table, you'll find something that looks kind of like this, where they have different ages, then they have a distribution period, and you sit there and you wonder to yourself, how does this what does this mean? What is 70 27.4 distribution period? What does that mean? Well, all you have to do is basically invert this number, and it basically is converting it. You just convert it to a percentage. So if you're 75 years old and you need to take an RMD, the RMD is 4.37% of the account balances that you have that are subject to RMDs. So when you're trying to calculate your RMD, you have to take your account balance as of the end of the year and then divide that by that distribution period. Or alternatively, you could invert it and then convert it to a percentage. So let's take an example of somebody who has $348,176 in their traditional accounts as of the end of the year. They'd have to withdraw, they'd be required to withdraw in the following year 33.91% from their account, which equals $13,600. Now, sometimes people say, okay, cool, I'll take that RMD, I'll put that in my Roth. No big deal. Well, you cannot. RMDs must go into a non-qualified account. So this is why this is so important. Because when you put that money from the RMD into the non-qualified account, non-qualified accounts, like I mentioned earlier, are subject to taxes on interest, dividends, capital gains. So you get taxed again on that money. So the reason why we want to get this money into Roth is because Roth is not subject to that. Sometimes then people will say to us, well, look, what if I just say, forget it, I'm not taking an RMD. I don't want to take an RMD. Well, I guess you don't have to, but you're subject to a 50% tax on the amount that you didn't take out. So it's way better to take the RMD and have to deal with the tax implications of that than to pay a 50% tax on the amount of money that you should have taken out. So the government gives you a very, very strong, they use a pretty strong stick to get you to take that money out. And so the reason why this is a challenge for retirees as they get older is that RMD amount goes up as a percentage over time. So if you looked at that table, that number starts to become a bigger and bigger percentage of your balance that you're required to take out. And it can push you into a higher tax bracket. It can mean that suddenly you have monies that maybe you wanted to have in a more flexible retirement or flexible type of account like a Roth, that now you can't because it's in a non-qualified account. Now, I will mention that the penalty that RMD penalty can be waived if there's a reasonable error and there's a way to file that. And that's something we try to always get ahead of by doing the planning on our team's side. But there are some exceptions where you can get away. So most retirement savings accounts are subject to RMDs. So things like a 401k, 403b, 457, anything that's traditional, those are subject to RMDs. So is your traditional TSP subject to RMDs, traditional IRA, RMDs, SEP IRAs, simple IRAs, things that are traditional, subject to RMDs. So are profit sharing plans. The only type of account not subject to RMDs, Roths. So Roths, I hope you all like. Roths are like we sometimes describe it. Roths are super money. So we know that, especially if you've accumulated money in your traditional account, we know that you might have a balance that you've saved over the course of your career. You'd like to get that money into Roth. How you want to be efficient with your taxes as much as possible. How do you do so? Well, the process of doing so, and this has become a lot more on people's radar because now you can do it within the TSP as well as doing it with an advisor or outside of the TSP, is something called a Roth conversion. So to do a Roth conversion, you need to have a Roth account opened to do so. So we always recommend folks open up a Roth account because Roths are subject to a vesting requirement. It's one of the things we do with every one of our clients here at Parco is we say, hey, look, you should open up a Roth, even if you fund it with just $100, because the vesting requirements are that you have to have the account open for 5 years and you have to be over age 59 and a half. Now, once you've got that Roth account open, they're really powerful because first, they provide the ultimate financial flexibility. And what do we mean by that? Once money's in that Roth account, it's never subject to, and it's vested, it's never subject to taxes ever again. It's super money, right? It can grow forever. Some of you have probably read about the investor Peter Thiel, who's turned his Roth account to he's got something like $5 or $6 billion tax free sitting in a Roth because it's grown tax free forever, right? He's just rolled startups he's invested equity into. So it's super money. And then importantly as well, and I think for a lot of folks on the call tonight, this is perhaps more important. It's a really powerful legacy planning tool. Because if your family inherits your traditional TSP, they inherit your traditional IRA, that's a nice thing to inherit, but they will have to distribute the money from a traditional account within 10 years of inheriting it, and they're going to have to pay taxes on that money as they withdraw. If your beneficiaries inherit a Roth, they never have to pay taxes on that money. They never have to pay taxes on them. So, what's the process of converting from a traditional to a Roth? So, basically, what you do with a Roth conversion is you take monies from your traditional account and convert them into Roth. And what's powerful about this is that there's no limit to how much money you can convert. Remember how earlier we talked about how there were contribution limits for your traditional TSP or your traditional IRA or Roth TSP or Roth IRA? There's no limit to how much money you can convert in any given year into a Roth. This is really, really powerful because it allows you, for all the flexibility with a Roth and can create a tax-free inheritance for your heirs, but the accounts aren't subject to RMDs. So let's walk through a practical example of how we would help somebody. Take an example of Federal Frank. Okay, he's 62 years old. He has 30 years of service with the government. He's retiring. His pension will be $30,000 per year. His Social Security will be $24,000 per year. He has $450,000 saved in his TSP, and he's a single guy. And he would like as much of as possible to get his money into Roth by the time he hits age 75, which is his RMD age. So what's special about being a federal employee, and we say this all the time here at Parco, some of you have probably heard this dozens of times because I say it every presentation, but federal employees are special when it comes to retirement. And one of the ways that you guys are special is that not only do you have Social Security, but you also have a pension. So for all federal employees, you guys basically have a floor of income, right? And Frank's no exception. So Frank has a pension of $30,000 a year. He has Social Security that's taxable at $20,400 per year. That's a floor. So even if he took no withdrawals out of his TSP, he should at least convert up to the top of his current bracket, which in his case, and this is something our platform can calculate, is $16,100 per year. So every year he'd convert that 16,100, gradually reduce his traditional balance and build up his Roth balance. That way he can insulate a large, if not all of his retirement savings by the time that he reaches age 75. Now, given how much Frank has saved, right? He's got $450,000 saved, $16,100 per year, probably not going to do it, right? We're not going to be able to do it all. So if Frank says, hey, look, I'm going to go up to the top of my next bracket, 16,100 that would round off to the top of his 12% bracket. Then a further 55,000 would round up to the top of the 22% bracket. So he could contribute that in that example, that's what is that, $71,400 per year. So if he's if he has a view that, hey, look, I don't think taxes are going down much in the future. I'd like to not have to worry about taxes on my retirement money as I get older. He could contribute almost his entire TSP and almost his entire retirement accounts by the time he reaches his mid 60s, if he plans it right. This is something we help folks with every single day. And it's always very dynamic, right? Because your taxes could change, obviously your incomes could change, all these things. But this is one of the strategies we recommend as sort of one of the creams on top every year. It's something we help our clients with, usually in end of Q3, beginning of Q4, to plan out those Roth conversions. And a little piece of news and something we're excited about here at Parco is this functionality, this Roth conversion planner, is going to be available within the Parco platform here very, very soon. So if that's something you'd like to have early access to, let us know. We'll have everybody on tonight's presentation be part of that like announcement when that comes out. But you'll be able to do annual Roth conversion planning right from the platform itself. Make it really easy and really fun. So when we think about like what we've talked about tonight, and when you're thinking about your Roth conversion checklist, the first thing we mentioned on our Roth conversion checklist is, and I'm going to answer these questions here in just a second. On the Roth conversion checklist is first you got to choose your retirement date, right? Because somebody that's planning to retire like Frank at 62 has a lot more time to do conversions than somebody that retires, let's say, at 68, who's only going to have maybe 7 years to convert. So knowing that retirement date is really important. Then try to calculate your expected income in retirement, right? Try to figure out what those numbers are going to look like so you can build that plan. Find your RMD age, right? If you're a little bit older, your RMD age is going to be sooner. Somebody who's a little bit younger. Then I think this is a really important one with number 4. Evaluate your tax tolerance and your tax outlooks for the future. So somebody that, let's say that I used the example earlier, somebody who's a doctor who works at the VA, maybe you're in a really, really high income tax bracket right now. And maybe in retirement, maybe you're going to move to a different state. Maybe you're going to have a lower uh, fixed income in retirement. So you might be in a really high bracket now and you expect it to materially drop in the future. Well, for those folks, it might make sense to invest more in traditional money, right? Defer taxes to the future when in the future you'll be in a lower bracket. For somebody else who maybe is less concerned about that or would rather, or maybe thinks, hey, look, I think taxes overall are going to go up a lot in the future on all brackets. I'd rather just pay the taxes now so I don't have to think about it. Then maybe Roth contributions matter more today. Again, what matters most though is how much you contribute, not where you contribute. Then find your annual conversion amount. And this is stuff that Parco can help you with. So I know there's a lot of questions that have come through. I saw a couple about IRMA. So I'm gonna start to field some of those. As always, it's a pleasure to you all. Hopefully you found tonight's presentation pretty helpful. And let me get into the specific questions that you all have, because I know this is a really important topic, especially as the end of the year is coming up. So if my 401k contribution throws me into a higher tax bracket, should I lower my contribution amount? Well, that's an interesting question. Usually, like your 401k contribution can't bump you into a higher bracket. It can actually lower your bracket. So let's say that you make, I'm making up a number here, $100,000 per year, and you max out your TSP contribution, and you're putting that all into traditional. That 24,500 that you're contributing, that is reducing your taxable income for the year. Right? That's reducing your AGI. So it can actually put you into a lower bracket going forward. So that's why we see folks that are maybe higher earners, they tend to prefer the traditional because they're in a higher tax bracket now and they can defer those taxes to retirement when they think they'll be in a lower tax bracket. Tammy, I hope that answered your question. It's great to see you on tonight. Let's see, next question here. How does this change when you are retired military and want to all right, let me just read through this question from Sam. how do these different things change if you're retired military and wanting to convert? Uh, and also if you have to be worried about IRMA with Medicare starting. We talked about converting more. So this might be a little bit controversial, but for folks who are like retired military or getting VA disability, or if you're getting a pension from the government, or your spouse is getting a pension, or you're getting Social Security, or your spouse is getting Social Security, if you have those fixed income sources coming in, those are just what you have coming in, right? You're not turning those incomes off. That's just a fact of life. And so, like, those are coming in regardless. Now, I know a lot of people are really, really sensitive to IRMA. And I completely understand that sensitivity because it is a real dollar amount that you see coming out of your Social Security benefit or that you have to write as a check. I get it. However, at Parker, we tried to zoom out and see like a little bit bigger picture. When you do the math for a lot of folks when it comes to IRMA, yeah, it can mean that, especially if you're doing Roth conversion, yeah, it can mean that you have a little bit more IRMA. You have to pay a little bit more in Medicare for a few years. However, the long-term benefit of getting more money into Roth, 9 times out of 10, I'd say 95 times out of 100, or 19 times out of 20, way outweigh the short-term impact of the earn. It's kind of interesting. Like we'll have folks that we work with that say, "Oh, like I hate having to pay the extra $150 per month for my IRMA for Social Security." But then they don't see the impact on the tax side of stuff, right? Because it just comes out as a withholding. So I think when you evaluate it on the whole, it's more important to focus on, hey, how do you get money converted so that way you're really avoiding this RMD cliff and this RMD challenge, and kind of just baking the IRMA in as a cost of doing business. And Sam, I'd love to kind of go through your situation, um, kind of like line by line, just to show you, you know, where the impact's biggest. Um, the second part of your question, tax and the conversions, can be withholdings and it come from my TSP fund? So, good question. Usually, when we do Roth conversions for folks, we usually, unless you have a lot of cash outside, and you're comfortable writing a check, but I'd say that most of the folks we work with would rather do exactly that. Would rather withhold the taxes from the conversion. So if you say, "Hey, look, I want to convert $40,000 from my traditional account this year," uh, we're going to withhold. I'm making up a number here. $8,000 for taxes. So net 32 goes into the Roth. I'd say that's the most common just because it just tends to be easiest just to withhold as you go in. Very, very common. Great question, Sam. John asks, if Federal Frank wanted to use some of the Roth at say 70, can he take it out while he is still converting? Yes, you definitely, definitely can. Plenty of people do that. Plenty of people do that. Great question, John. How does Arundaya asks, how does Roth conversion work for married couples, both in federal jobs now, plan to retire in a couple of years? So I will say that most folks, especially most folks who work for the federal government, do their Roth conversions in retirement. And for federal couples, the process of Roth conversion is essentially the same as it is for single individuals. Um, However, let's say that I'm making up a number here, 62 and your spouse is 60. The 62-year-old has fewer years before they hit that RMD age. So oftentimes we'll prioritize the older spouse on the Roth conversion side first to try to get more of their assets into Roth because they're under more of a time crunch. Um, but the planning is exactly the same, but what bucket we pull from usually is just dependent on who's closest to the RMD age. Great question. Asta asks, is there a difference between Roth conversion within the TSP versus Roth conversion at an outside brokerage account or an outside custodian? Within the TSP, I wouldn't say there's any difference from a practical perspective. I think part of the reason why I'm doing it outside of the TSP is you have more flexibility on the hey Dwayne, you have more flexibility on the way you do the withholdings. And you also, with an outside account, you have more flexibility on the investments that you do. Um, so I think that's the principal way. I mean, what's most important too, as to this is actually a really good point, is you should use the accounts that you'll actually execute with it. And so what I mean by that is like sometimes we'll have folks tell us, hey, look, yeah, I'm going to do all of this myself. And we say, okay, that's great. And then we talk to them again 3 years later and we say, hey, look, did you end up doing the Roth conversions like you said when you were going to retire? It's like, oh, no, I didn't do it. And I think one of the reasons why folks really like working with us is that we're looking out for every one of our clients every single year to make sure that their Roth conversion strategy is front of mind when it needs to be. It's like an accountability mechanism. So as long whatever method or whatever tool or whatever place you have your money where you're actually going to execute on the things that you need to, that's the best place to have it. So Asta, hopefully that answered your question. All right. Ronald, let me ask, can you only do these conversions after you retire? If I choose, there's a question: can you only do these conversions after you retire? If I choose to convert now, I would have to pay the taxes on the conversion with money other than money that's in my TSP, correct? So you can do conversions while you're working. People just tend not to because it's usually not very tax efficient. Because think about it like this: like let's say that you had 30 years of service. Let's use Federal Frank as an example. Frank has 30 years of service, and let's pretend he made well, that's kind of a good example. He makes $100,000 a year. So if Frank makes $100,000 a year, uh, and he does a Roth conversion, he's going to only be able to convert based on like he's got a salary coming in of $100,000 per year. So any amount that he converts is going to be added to that 100,000. If he retires, his pension might only be $30,000. So he has this big income drop. And because there's that big income drop, he likely has a lot more room to do conversions, which means that he'll pay less in taxes per dollar of conversion. So that's why most of the folks we work with do Roth conversion as a retirement strategy versus doing it as a while they're working. There's obviously exceptions to that, but within our process, it's the focus while you're working, getting as much money into retirement accounts. And then in retirement, it's figuring out how to get that money out of there as efficiently and as delightfully as possible. Ronald, I hope that answered your question. All right. Dwayne asks, will I be affected by Irma when I turn on Social Security at age 67? You might be. It just depends on how much you make. Um, so Irma, and we haven't done a presentation on this in a while, but Irma is a different type of earnings test that's used for evaluating how much for those of you who don't know, evaluating how much your Medicare premiums are. And it's much more comprehensive than the normal adjusted gross income and taxable income that the IRS uses. Medicare uses something called MAGI. It pretty much includes everything you make without deductions. So, Dwayne, I'd hypothesize it might affect you. I would just have to see how your guys' income looks, and then we could do that calculation for you. Um, and if you let us know, we could set up a time to do that with you. Da, 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 da. I've recently so there's another question in the Q&A section. I've recently increased TSP to most or almost all of my earned income. Do my increased contributions go to my Roth? The analyst saw I could do a percentage. I'll retire in 3 years. I'm trying to reduce my taxable income this year because I received a windfall of cash that'll be considered income and tax. So for somebody like you who says, "Hey, I have this is kind of a banner year, or I have a big windfall," I would prioritize, if that's true, your traditional accounts. So maxing out your traditional TSP, traditional IRAs if you can participate, because that will reduce your taxable income. And I don't know how old you are, but let's say that you're 48, you could put up to $24,500 into a traditional account, and that would reduce your taxable income for this year. So especially if you're having like a supernatural year or supernatural where you're making a lot of money this year, I would prioritize the traditional. Jim asks, ahead of RMDs, what are the tax advantages of drawing down traditional IRA for qualified charitable distributions and self-fund for long-term care in addition to Roth? Well, well, the tax advantages of drawing down for qualified charitable distributions, so you get a bigger tax deduction. Uh, when it comes to like self-funding for long-term care costs, there's a couple different ways people try to do that. Um, traditional long-term care, traditional meaning like the ones that's existed in the past, has started to become really unaffordable. So we have seen some folks who will buy life insurance policies that have a long-term care rider, and they'll fund that with distributions from a retirement account. And the premiums might be kind of substantial, but what's nice about it is that it provides a tax-free death benefit to your heirs. So if legacy planning is important, that's the first function. But then second, if you do need long-term care or you can't complete 2 of 6 activities of daily living, you can basically tap that life insurance as a source of funds for long-term care. And it's based on the death benefit. So if that is a concern for you, Jim, like that's a strategy we see folks employ too, um, especially ahead of RFDs. Hopefully that answers your question. Are you all finding tonight's presentation helpful? Is this what you were looking for? We always want to make these very valuable to you all. I do see a lot of y'all also responded to the poll we put out. Uh, we put those out from time to time just to get a sense of what everybody's participating in and using. So if you haven't answered that poll, please do so. I'll stay on here for just a few more minutes because it seems like most of the questions have been answered, but if more come in, these presentations are for you all. Also, I guess 2 things. We'll be doing a encore of tonight's presentation, not next week, but the following week. Our team is traveling next week. And if there's other topics you'd like us to cover, please put them here. We had some folks a couple weeks ago. They were requesting us to do presentations on the new Trump accounts that are available for like new families and babies and infants. Um, that can be really powerful, like generational wealth building opportunities. So we've got that on our calendar. Uh, we know this Roth conversion one's obviously very timely as we're approaching the fall. Um, um, so if there's other topics you'd like us to cover, please tell us. We take your feedback really seriously. All right. Well, if there's no more questions for tonight, as always, it's a pleasure to present to you all. If you haven't already, please create your account on our platform so you can be up to speed as soon as we launch that new Roth conversion planner. Uh, and we will see you all, not like I mentioned, not next week, but the following week for an encore of tonight's presentation. We'll likely make a couple tweaks just because I saw some stuff that we could improve. But as always, have a great evening, everyone. Be well, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.